Welcome back. We're at devotion number 35 in our series, and today we see that Christ suffered and died to give marriage its deepest meaning. Now there's two thoughts that we don't typically think about as a connection: Christ's suffering and death and marriage. We know the Bible teaches about both, but we don't often think of the Bible as connecting both. But we see here in our passage for today that the Bible does. Ephesians 5 verse 25 is our verse for the day, and that says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." God tells us here that the husband's duty toward his wife is to mirror the duty that Christ served the church, and that was offering up his life for the church. And so husbands are to mirror in their marriages that sacrificial love of the Savior. Now, if you read through Ephesians chapter 5, you'll see that the wife also has a duty, and that is to respect her husband just as the church respects Christ. The Apostle Paul calls this a mystery in Ephesians chapter 5. Now, it's not a mystery because it's something that we can't understand, but it's a mystery because it's something that God has revealed to us and must reveal to us by faith. The biblical idea of a mystery is really just something that is covered or hidden, and that doesn't mean it's covered or hidden for an indefinite period of time. It can be made known, and Christ has revealed or made known this mystery in his word, that his love for sinners on the cross is a mirroring of what the husband and wife should show one another in a marriage. You know, I recently saw in the news, I read an article about a couple who, the husband and wife are both 100 years old now, and they've been married for 82 years. I think that's as long as I've ever seen anyone being married. And obviously, the questions that come along with that are, how is that possible? How did they do it? What's the secret? Paul gives us the answer to that in our text. Paul says he reveals to us this mystery. You know, the secret of marriage is not some magical hokey-pokey thing that maybe works for some people and doesn't for others. God gives us the ingredients in his word that work for a lasting and fulfilling lifelong marriage. And it centers on Jesus Christ. Now, the husband is given the charge to act as Christ in the marriage by being self-sacrificial, but that doesn't mean that the wife must look at her husband as a God-like figure. Nor does it mean that a husband must be willing to suffer at the hands of his wife. Piper points that out correctly in our devotion. It simply means that a husband, if he's going to follow God's charge, if he's going to live to the fullest potential that God has created him to live at, is going to want to mirror the attitude of Christ. And that is putting others before himself, specifically his wife. And what a blessing it is, not only for the husband then, but for both husband and wife in a marriage to recognize that when I do fail in my calling, when I do sin against my spouse, when I do put myself above others, at the end of the line for a believer is that recurring message: Christ suffered and died for you. I think there's a reason God built that into the idea of marriage, so that as we go through that most important of all relationships here on this earth, he gives us the keys to success through that. And for both spouses to come back again and again to the recurring theme and promise that Jesus is their Savior from sin. That is a balm and an ointment for any problem you experience in marriage or any other relationship for that matter. And so what we see in our devotion today is very appropriate for the season of Lent, even if we may not connect the idea of marriage with the suffering and death of Christ. That is actually a theme throughout the entire Bible as God presents the believer's relationship with him. It's presented as a bride with her husband. From the very beginning in the book of Genesis, when God first ordained marriage for Adam and Eve, through the prophets who talked about marriage in particular and who used marriage as an analogy for their preaching with God, all the way up to the Gospels where Jesus reaffirmed the biblical teaching of marriage and talked about how it is one man and one woman for life, to all the way to the end in the book of Revelation, where the church is depicted as a bride adorned for her husband, adorned for Christ. That's a special message for you, whether you're married or single today, that you are connected so intimately with Jesus by faith, and that what created that bond for you is your Savior's self-sacrificial love, the very love we meditate upon during the season of Lent.